longstanding colleague and colleague at DePaul, Professor Chris Didez, Assistant Professor in the Department of Religious Studies here at DePaul. Chris's work is actually very relevant to the topic we're addressing in this conference. He's just finished a manuscript called The Aesthetics and Ethics of Faith, treating the dialogue between pragmatism and liberationist thought. So Chris Didez.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you for your honesty.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. Thanks to the sound person in the back who does his or her magic. It's really a privilege to moderate the session, and I welcome you all to DePaul and to this wonderful conference. I would also like to recognize the presence of our president, Dennis Holsteiner, who is so graciously taking some time out of his busy day to be with us here today. So, thank you. We have a very interesting session today, and we're going to begin with Maria Arul Raja, who is a director he is a director of the studies in theology at the college's Arul Kadal Center. And I'm not going to read everything here on his bio, but I do want to highlight a couple of things. So he has been teaching at the Arul Kadal Jesuit Regional Theology Center since 1993. And listen to this. After his degrees in biblical studies, sociology, journalism, mass media, psychology, Sanskrit, folklore, philosophy, and religious studies, he was awarded a PhD by Madras University for the dissertation titled Subaltern Encounter with Their Suffering, an emancipatory interpretation of Mark 15, 1 through 47. You usually don't hear that many degrees coming from one person. With his ongoing dialogue with the subaltern groups, Dalit movements, women's groups, youth groups, and alcoholics, he has contributed over 150 research articles to various national and international journals. It's a privilege to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Maria Arul Raja.
Dear friends, once again we are in the thick jungle of discourses on the fine-tuned nuances of cultural prejudices and cultural discourses and emancipatory risk-taking in terms of bringing out a new culture of emancipation. So, we are this with from the culture of casteism, which is a typical phenomenon of South Asian culture, to the culture of communion, Eucharistic intervention. You know, it is in a way a sort of a cultural violence, so to say, not permitting a culture to be present as it is. And India has to be demolished because of the Eucharistic intervention. We need to have something or other when there is a culture of casteism. You know, there is a sort of culture of discriminating hierarchy which is perpetuated on the basis of religion in the name of mythical justification, in the name of religious legitimation, in the name of calling it as even a divine order, even of the order of creation. So that is why it's very difficult to break down. So we are proceeding along these lines: caste discrimination, South Asia, church and the critique of casteism, admonition from within and without the church, critique from within, critique from without, casteism versus communion, and dialogue between the Dalit world and the Eucharistic world, credible accompaniment with the Dalits. And under this we have got these triple dimensions, vibrations under the Dalit soil, images of God, materiality, promotion of human dignity is the good news, walking with the Dalits, autonomy for decision making, for conversion, prophetism from the soil, repentance in action, reading with the Dalits, encountering suffering with the Dalits, ethical purity against ritual purity, proclamation only after listening. And the conclusion is community building against the culture of casteism. This is how we are going to proceed. Caste discrimination, section number 1. 1/4 of the whole of the Indian population relegated to the margins of the Indian caste-ridden society. This figure does not include those who are Christians and Muslims, who could be approximately 25 million. There is an aberration with regard to the very numerical statistical data. On the one hand, people talk about we are not bothered about this discrimination. We are meant for universal humanity. We are not interested in caste. This itself is a hijacking of the whole question of not taking stock of the discrimination. It is an escapism through universal language. Sometimes they escape through particular language. Sometimes there is an escapism through universal language. We are serving the humanity. All of us are Christians. All of us are Indians. And see the farce again. Though the Constitution of the India has outlawed the practice of untouchability in any form as a criminal offense, the disadvantaged Dalits are ostracized. Even again there is a problematic by way of labeling the untouchables. So far they have been labeled by others. You the blackies, you the dirty creatures, you the noseless fellows, you are good for nothing. But these days, for the past 30 years or so, the Dalits are naming themselves. We, the Dalits, name ourselves as the Dalits so that we can locate who is sitting above us. So it's a self-designation. Dalits are ostracized from even and persecuted in the day-to-day life of the Indian society. Even the remedial measures of reservation of the jobs and the educational privileges did not suffice to undo the injustice done to the Dalits. The Dalits are despised by the caste-minded majority as the untouchable people. You are condemned to be untouchable. You are metaphysically untouchable. They are sought to be ill-treated as the untouchables to the extent of robbing their self-worth with a caste belief that they are despicably condemned to be abused or tolerated. So in the South Asian scenario, what is the mindset behind the caste world? I build my human dignity upon the broken debris of somebody else's dignity. This seems to be the mindset. I oppress you, therefore I am. My salvation is because I oppress you, and I am entitled to oppress you. This is the virus mindset, and even the victims are falling flat before this particular salvific promise of the caste system. What is the promise of the caste system? What is the salvation promise of the caste system? If you join us, someone is still below you. So lift up your columns high. So this is the salvation promise. Against which the Eucharist has to fight it out. And the church under the grip of casteism. See the farce again. The church came to India with the intention of baptizing. But it got baptized by casteism. Instead of baptizing others, proclaiming the good news, the church subserviently got into the culture of casteism. And somehow, because of this particular scientific promise, if someone is still under you, why can't he join this particular hierarchy? So that's why, in the Indian scenario, caste discrimination practice or untouchability takes multiple forms. Though claiming to be one in Christ, there are some churches built for the separate caste groups, retaining their caste identity. allotment of separate places in some of the common worship centers is another eyesore. That Christians are supposed to occupy the place distance from the church and excluded by the caste-minded Christians. Even the dead of the Dalit communities are buried in a separate cemeteries. Perhaps even in heaven also there will be a separate place. And God has to allot. You, high caste, come to my right. You, low caste, go to the left. Out of 156 Catholic bishops in India, 150 bishops belong to the upper caste. Perhaps the Holy Spirit is moving only to the upper echelons of the society. Only 6 bishops are Dalits out of 12,500 Catholic priests. Only 600 are from Dalit community. Those Dalits constitute 75% of the Indian Christian community. The control of the church is in the hands of 25% of the upper caste Christians. Okay, things are not totally in disorder. There are these sort of prophetic elements from within and without. So let's talk about critique from within. While critically introspecting on its life and mission in the Indian Church through the official body of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of India, has strongly come out on the incompatibility of caste system and Christ-centered community repeatedly through their general body statements. Pope John Paul II challenged the Indian bishops from the state of Tamil Nadu on November 17th during their unleavened visit in the following manner. At all times, you must continue to make certain that special attention is given to those belonging to the lowest caste, especially the Dalits. They should never be segregated from other members of society. A semblance of a caste-based prejudice in relations between Christians is a countersign to authentic human solidarity, a threat to genuine spirituality, and a serious hindrance to the Church's mission of evangelization. Therefore, the Pope says, customs or traditions that perpetuate or reinforce caste division should be sensitively reformed so that they may become an expression of the solidarity of the whole Christian community. And critique from without, outside the church. Many people have been critiquing. Social reformers of 19th-20th centuries like Mahatma Phule and Mahatma Gandhi, revolutionaries like Ambedkar and Ayodhya Pandit identified the dynamic energies of the teachings of Jesus in breaking the caste system, fragmenting the people. But the actual life witnesses of the Christians were under fire with the ruthless critique of these non-Christians for having miserably betrayed Jesus and shamelessly upholding the caste system. And casteism versus communion. Now, we like to clearly differentiate what makes a culture into a caste culture. What makes a communion as a communion of culture of communion. You know, culture of casteism by its very nature, hierarchization is its hallmark. Hierarchization of persons, things, space, and time. And as far as possible to make it as a discriminated hierarchy. Egalitarianization of everyone and everything in all seasons and times under normal temperature and pressure. Culture of casteism thrives on exclusion of others to be dismissed as the deplorably impure and worthy of human dignity. Whereas culture of communion struggles for the inclusion of others at all costs to be embraced as co-humans worthy of human dignity. Culture of casteism goes for attributed purity based on one's birth. You know, permanency is the hallmark of casteism. Permanency. No baptism water would ever remove that. No blood of Christ will remove that. You are condemned forever. Whereas culture of communion achieved purity based on one's ethical performance. Ethical performance. So culture of casteism is obsessed with not getting contaminated with the permanent pollution. A sort of saving myself from the dirt. Whereas this will be busy with gradual construction of purity from below. I commune with you, that is why I become more pure. It is the sort of purity by way of separating myself, is purity by way of getting mingled up with others. Culture of casteism is basically the construction of institution of greater inequality as an inevitable necessity upheld by arbitrary, metaphysical and unethical principles. Fall back to casteism. While talking about racism, there is a sort of a physical evidence of differences in the color of the skin. While talking about the patriarchy, there is a physical evidence of differences in the structure of a body, male, female, transgender. But with regard to caste, there is no clinical evidence. There is no change of the difference in the blood group, not even a color. So it is arbitrary. So one Spanish woman who was interested in studying Dalit theology came to Chennai airport. She was so thrilled about, locating who are the Dalits, who are not Dalits. Getting down in Chennai airport, everyone looks like the same, but where are the Dalits? Where are the Dalits? Show me. With their different skin, different style, different hairstyle. No, this is an arbitrary type. So this is a funny type of data which has to be looked into when talking about the caste system here. As culture of community may be busy with construction of practical ways of democratization of power as an ethical necessity, upheld by rational, practical, and moral principles, just against arbitrary, metaphysical, unethical principles, rational, practical, moral principles. Culture of casteism will be busy with the tendencies of absolutizing the divine aspects and relativizing the human dignity. We the theologians like to note it down. We are somehow busy with pontificating language. Somehow busy with, absolute language, final say. Culture of communion will be busy with relativizing the divine aspects and absolutizing the human dignity. If at all a God is not promoting a human dignity, okay, for the time being we are not going to be busy about this type of democratical statement that they are ready. Culture of course is salvation as an individualistic process through community, though community is needed for accumulation of power. This is how caste dynamics is very much operating. Culture of community will be busy with salvation as a communitarian process, and community is needed for democratization of power. So role and function of community. Now dialogue between the Dalit world and the Eucharistic world. One aspect will be memory. The challenging aspects of salvation, Eucharistic world and Dalit world. We can go through it fast. Memory, under the memory, movement from the centralized dictatorship to the autonomous self-governance, Exodus event. And movement from self-styled exclusion of the outlaws to the communion with them as co-humans, Jesus event. Fall back to the church event, being elevated from the grip of the forces of death into energies of a resurrection, the Kerygma. This is how there is a cumulative memory of the Eucharist, which is brought to us. With regard to the Dalit world, dissenting against the caste hegemony and dreaming of becoming self-assertive humans, moving from the reality of horizontal vertical hierarchy towards becoming co-humans with equal footing, and wriggling out of the caste-based atrocities towards harmony with other humans. These are the struggles of day-to-day lives of the Dalits. Sacrifice. The blood of the sacrificial animal as a shield for protecting the voiceless, Exodus event. The kenosis for defending the defenseless, Jesus event. The culture of democratizing the God-given resources free from the grip of the monopolized power centers, church event, early Christian community. The ritual. The murdered ancestors are counted as the accompanying protectors of the living Dalits, sacrifice. Continuing with the imposed humiliation for serving the rest of the community through menial jobs ensuring health and hygiene for all. Materiality is the site of salvation. Dalits are in close proximity with the dirt, blood, with the corpse, and they are quite much in tune with the seismic movements of the materiality of the world. So they are not very much thrilled with the high metaphysical, elevated concepts of grandeur. They are busy with, what's the baby step, next move. And the native culture of democratizing sharing of food, materials, and other resources. I am drawing the inspiration for the Dalit world from people like Arul Raja and Felix Wilfred and people like Arul Raja and so on for their field studies and so on. Presence. Next aspect. Unwavering accompaniment of the divine with the migrants through the thick and thin of the wilderness. Abiding presence to sustain the little flock till the end of the times. Abiding presence. Jonah and Jesus till the end. Persistent commitment for using the last and the lost through the personal investment of oneself, church. Whereas Dalit world, loyal accompaniment with any ideology or religion in the midst of disadvantages. Dalit Christians are having plenty of disadvantages, still they are not ready to quit the Catholic faith. And never shying away from the defeated cause, that is, even amidst defeat. And involvement through manual labor and scaffolding for promoting health and hygiene makes Dalit presence physically intense on the material plane. Egalitarianism. From power accumulation to power distribution, like the receiver. From monopolizing the divine to democratization of the divine. From the old heaven of waiting for the wealthy to the new earth of waiting on the wretched. Dalit world. Negating every form of discriminatory hierarchy, opting for egalitarianism, revolting through struggles of temple entries against the monopoly of God by the caste-minded people, growing as co-humans with others as a foundation of inclusive ideology for the Dalits to build inclusive communities, leading the humanity towards casteless to egalitarian society. Incredible accompaniment with the Dalits. The church is interested in accompanying the Dalits as a Eucharistic community. It has to take note of these three dimensions. Take note of the vibrations under the Dalit fire. Yesterday there was a Chilean cry. Look into the implicit way of becoming Eucharist or being Eucharist. What is the Eucharistic way of living? Walking to the Dalit, rereading the Dalits. And a page, vibration under the Dalit soil. You can go it fast. By and large, the Hebraic European versions of the interpretation of the revelation of God are predominantly expressed through the mediation of the male voice with an androcentric outlook of life. The image of the divine from the Dalit world seems to have an insistence on the female voice with the maternal care, breast goddess, and connection to goddess. The autonomy of these female faces of the divine is quiet in contrast with the domesticated goddesses under the repressive male gods of the classical religions into pantheon. The extreme distanciation of the inaccessible transcendental God elusive tradition with the terrific consequences of the direct encounter may not be attuned to the Dalit expectation of the immediate accessibility with the divine. They like to have a hotline with the divine always. Such a reach out to the divine for the Dalits has to be free from the excesses of the intermediaries like the priestly class people or the religious pundits known for their culture of hierarchization of everything and everyone, people, time, objects, God or goddesses. Dalit brand of mutuality of easy access, I call it Emmanuel, mutuality of easy access. It is not only God with us, but the human with us. Emmanuel, between the divine and the human, has to be seen from the point of view of the gradual evolution of the divine from the down-to-earth historical reality of day-to-day struggles of the concrete life situation. In other words, the concept of the evolution of the divine from the murder, Kolayil Oditha Daivangal. They've got a unique way of evolving the images of God. The gods are evolved from the murder. In the act of protecting the village, in the act of protecting the community, the divinity is born. Kolayil Udita Daivangal, divine, born out of murder. That's why yesterday, Kadal was talking about Indian brand of images of God, murdered God. It doesn't appeal on the one hand. I suspect it's because an elite brand of expectation is there. Whereas for the Dalits, they feel at home with the blood. Even their divinity is born out of murder. Murder out of the protecting exercise of the village. In other words, a community building God, in the act of protecting community, is getting murdered, and this murder is a sort of a meaningful murder. So these days, much research is going on along these lines. So, collectively, the Daivangal could creatively vibrate with the ascending Christology rather than the descending Christology. One could identify incompatibility of the need for imitating the kenosis, voluntary self-emptying, imposed on the Dalits, who are already forced to empty themselves. As soon as they talk about self-emptying, there is a sort of inner revolt from enough with the self-emptying, enough with the kenosis. Already they have been, exploited much. It's a time for us to assert now. So, second part of this particular kenotic story. Second part of the kenotic story. Already forced to empty themselves as the historical necessity for their survival in the caste-ridden society. What we need is the gospel of assertion in the face of demonic oppression of casteism. Now, why nations under the Dalit soil? Materiality is the site of salvation. The sensibilities emerging out of wilderness identify the movement of life from the stellar bodies and the heaven-related divinity leading to the emphasis of the transcendental dimension of God. The Jewish Christian world has received this heritage in its discourses on the divine. But on the other hand, the sensibilities emerging from the agrarian foliage identify the movement of the life through the flora and fauna throbbing on the earthbound realities. And hence they tend to emphasize the immanent dimensions while grappling with the divine. The Dalits have been inheritors of such a patrimony. And hence their way of constructing salvation history tends to be along the lines of proceeding from the immanence to the transcendence, from the here and now to the eschatological future, with their rooted history of being deprived of the resources and powers for dignified life here and now. They cannot construct an a priori heaven out there. Now the time now is 11:28. I'm aware of Pilario. Promotion of human dignity as a good news. What constitutes a good news? That matters. What is the curriculum? And somehow missionaries down the centuries, missionaries played havoc. In my opinion, they seem to have lost. Quite many missionaries seem to have lost this particular aspect of it. That is, having craving for being gripped by the news of being treated as dignified human persons worthy of becoming co-humans with others. In the face of being deceived against such valid expectations, they have been experimenting with floor crossing between various groups, religions, ideologies, political parties. And the ritual has become a sort of field day for conversion, discussion on conversion. Even the Hindu fundamentalists talk about conversion among the beliefs. Christian missionaries talk about conversion among the beliefs. Leftists, they talk about recruiting lots of people for even sort of arms, attack by arms from among the Dalit group. What matters to them is the good news of the human dignity in their day-to-day life. If this good news is denied them, then they would not mind closing down the channels of further dialogue with the editor. They would not mind walking with the Dalits. Autonomy for decision for conversion. Dalits have been experimenting on associating themselves with various groups, ideologies, religions, and political parties by attempting at humanizing themselves. This is how the history of Dalit conversion to other religions is to be interpreted. But the tertiary class ideologues or religious pundits have been interpreting Dalit conversion from native religion to other religions as their immaturity, disloyalty, unsteadiness, uprooted unreliability, including Mahatma Gandhi, who was condemning Dalits as if they are immature animals, immature cows. So Mahatma Gandhi was denying the subjectivity of the untouchables. Right now, Dalits are revolting against that. They dismiss from their collective consciousness. You might be a Mahatma. Mahatma means Maha means great, Atma means soul. You might be Mahatma to others, but not to us. This seems to be a sort of assertion from among the Dalits. What they forget is that the human agency of the Dalits has been actually engaged in the autonomous option autonomous option of choosing a religion of their choice in tune with the historical agenda of humanizing themselves. The Christians intending to engage themselves in a significant dialogue with the Dalits have to congratulate them for consciously and deliberately activating their autonomy in the choosing their religion of their choices. So on that count, suppose Dalit Christians are moving away from Christianity. Can Christians congratulate them? Congratulations, you have made a good choice. You are moving away from our religion. Congratulations, because you have come of age. So far, you have been following the prescriptive ethics. Now you are exploring your ethics. It might be a right choice or wrong choice, doesn't matter. Congratulations. Prophetism from the soil. The Christians have been trained to listen to the seasoning proof and believe such ordinary words. So the Dalits to listen to the extraordinary word of God if it happens to be a Eucharistic community. Dalit deprivations may not be dramatically represented with the brilliant illustrations from the media house establishments. Will such a prophetic voice from the Dalit soil be listened to by the Eucharist-centered communities? Repentance in action. As part of regrettably walking with the Dalits, the Christians have to come out with a public apology for having offended them down the centuries. The mass conversion movement from among the Dalits to Christianity have been their expression of having taken a definite stand against the sinful system of caste hierarchy. And even after such conversions, Dalits are stigmatized with the practice of untouchability, separate graveyards, separate churches, and refusal to take them as a partner for sacred offices. For all these excesses heaped upon the Dalits by a caste-minded people, the caste-ridden church and the caste-ridden South Asia have to ask for forgiveness for them. Really, the Dalits. This is another area. The ways of treating the problem of evil in the classic religions are along with the lines of blaming the victims, as illustrated in the doctrine of original sin, ignorance, vidya, passion of avarice, trishna, Buddhism, and so-called sinner. For Dalit suffering, it is not because of their avidya, it is not because of their original sin. It's not because of their own ignorance. Somebody else's avidya with which they have. So we need to have a different problem of evil, system of problem of evil. But there is something caused to Dalits by the systems of casteism, untouchables, are not at all caused by the Dalit brand of sins, anomalies, moral failures. And here, one of the culprits will be construction of holiness, appropriation of sacred, claim of spiritual legitimacy. Construction of holiness may run the risk of creating a spiritual hierarchy, leading to the political hierarchy along the following lines. You know, every construction of purity is a political act. Every construction of purity is a political act. And somehow it has to be dealt with rather at the ground level. So more consecrated people are having supposed power and privilege, less consecrated people are supposed to have curses and condemnation. Against these trends of constructing holiness, leading to power and hierarchy, Jesus of Nazareth was standing along with the sinners. Along with the sinners. The proclamation only after listening. Both the Exodus event and Jesus event emerged as a good news in the topography of the wilderness, which entails the mode of proclamation as a communication model. But the Dalit event emerges as a good news in the topography of agrarian soil, entailing the mode of enlightenment as its communication model. We need to revisit the proclamation theology. Proclamation model or the enlightenment model. We need to somehow, if at all we like to have a meaningful dialogue. So on this count, listening has to be prime necessity before proclaiming. If the claim of the church that she is the extension of the broken body and the spirit or blood of the same Eucharistic Lord is a credible one, then she can never shy away from the mission of ever becoming a community building communities with inclusive orientations, challenging every brand of human-made barriers of fragmentation. Entering into the lanes and bylanes of the conflict-ridden society, she will identify the broken people, join hands with the people of goodwill to empower the marginalized, including Dalits. Empowered by the Eucharistic culture, the church cannot have the luxury of ghettoizing herself into an intra-inclusive organization with their own little world of cultic idioms and functions. The actual worship of the demonic caste system will be replaced by the worship of the egalitarian Lord of history. The prevailing culture of caste-mindedism will be replaced by an energetic, innovative intervention of civil space enabling the marginalized to create history. In the following manner, the Church can very well Eucharistize the broken world of Dalits as well as the broken world of the anti-Dalit humans. All those who are being counted as untouchable polluted by the mindsets of the power centers are the privileged medium of the divine revelation. It is through these despised laws, the inclusive culture of embracing every human as a co-human is manifestly expressed by the divine. If the Indian Church is awakened to this, then she could proceed with the great courage and confidence, exorcising Indian soil from the scourge of casteism, excluding the realization of emancipation of Dalits and tribals. India can never become a people of God. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Raja. Very interesting. What we'll do is we'll save some time at the end of this hour and a half for some questions and answers. So we'll go ahead and move over to Daniel Pilario. And by way of introduction, Daniel Pilario is the Dean of St. Vincent School of Theology at Adamson University in the Philippines. Dr. Pilario received his licentiate in theology from the Catholic University of Louvain, Belgium in 1998, where he also defended his doctoral dissertation. His award-winning research has been published as Back to the Rough Grounds of Praxis, Exploring Theological Method with Pierre Bourdieu. His field of research covers fundamental theology, theological anthropology, enculturation, interreligious dialogue, popular religions, theological methods, and political social theory. Dr. Pilario.
Thanks, Chris, for the kind words. Thanks to Peter and Dennis for welcoming me to this university. So, my talk is entitled Human Suffering in the Eucharist, Retrieving Sacrifice in the Contemporary Magisterium. For those who like outlines, this slide is for you. I would like to divide my talk into 4 parts. The first part would be an elucidation of my social education, an experience that I have on weekend ministries in the parish, Vincent and parish in Payatas in Manila. Second would be an inquiry into the narratives from the center on what it thinks what the Eucharist should be today. And third would be a questioning on those narratives. And hopefully in the 4th part, we can figure out something for us. Stories from the margins. I don't know if you have eaten pagpag, but maybe the next question is, what is that? Not even an ordinary Filipino would know what it is. Pagpag is the Filipino word for the verb to shake off. But in the context of Payatas dump site, the largest dump site in the megacity Manila, pagpag is not a verb, it is a noun. It is the kind of food, not the Asian exotic type that you might be thinking of at the moment, but one which people throw away in the garbage bins of multinational fast food chains. Say, a slice of chicken which you did not finish at KFC or McDonald's, and which lands at the dump site the next day. The scavenger who finds it shakes it off to take the dust off, or hits it a little over a burning coal if it is too cold to swallow, and eats it as his breakfast or lunch before going to the rubbish dump to scavenge for dear life. Are there many people who are doing this? Of course, the scavengers would not tell everyone about it, but in the context of the Philippines, where in the most recent survey there are 3.3 million families which suffer involuntary hunger, eating pagpag is a daily phenomenon among the hundreds of scavengers in the Payatas dump site. Here, some people literally eat and live on the wastes of others. In the most recent survey on poverty and hunger in the Philippines during the last quarter of the 2011, there is around 43% of our population who have experienced involuntary hunger. The questions posed to the respondents are quite concrete and honest. During the last 3 months, this is the question, have you and your family experienced hunger and there was really nothing to eat on your table? If you did, was it only once, several times, or always? 21.5% says only once, 18% says several times, and 3.5% replied always. All in all, that is around 43% of the 92 million Filipinos. Quite a painful experience for a people who loves to cook and eat always. I first came to Payatas in the 1990s as a young priest when our parish was set up. The dump site was still a large valley during that time. Now it has turned itself into high mountains of stinking waste, and on its top people rush to salvage whatever their hands could lay hold of. At the end of the day, each person brings his catch to the junk shop owner, who weighs them and pays them according to kind. And here is the price list with dollar equivalents. Maybe some of you would like to capitalize. On a lucky day, when one chances on a gold ring, she can sell it for as high as $30 to $40. But that happens only once in a lifetime of a scavenger. In an ordinary day, a scavenger goes home with a meager $1. If one is already skilled in the job, a little more than that, maybe $5. With such a meager amount, the pagpag is quite a big help, since most also brings this extra food home to be shared on their family tables at dinner. Talk about the Eucharist. As if life is not hard enough, for the dump site worker, there still exists real hazards of scavenging which are often taken for granted. Toxic waste from industrial plants, infectious rubbish from hospitals, the nauseating stench of decaying garbage, broken bottles, sharp objects. For the past 10 years, I have been helping my Vincentian converts in that parish for the weekend ministries. I celebrate the Eucharist in different makeshift chapels around what looks like several mountains of garbage. On these masses, making the sign of the cross over the chalice during the epiclesis also doubles as a gesture to drive away the big flies from the garbage, competing with the Holy Spirit to come into the sweet wine. After the Mass, I linger for some time to be with the people, listen to their stories and jokes, eat in baptismal parties, and bless their dead. On these weekends, I have blessed newborn infants, beautiful babies, on cardboard coffins, small children who died of simple lung illnesses because their families could not afford simple medication. The attendance on Sunday Masses is quite erratic. On special days like the Holy Week, Christmas, and similar occasions, the chapel is overflowing. On ordinary Sundays, only some few would attend. Community leaders mainly. The rest in the dump site are trying to sort out whatever they could get for the next meal. This led me to ask, is the Mass that I celebrate important and meaningful to them? If so, what meaning do they attribute to it? So I ask around. I get a whole spectrum of answers, like it helps me forget my problems, I can feel God near me, I can pray to the patron saint. But there are also those who said, I have no time for it, I have to go up to the dump site. Some would say maybe God has forgotten us here, and another told me, she said, me, I attend service at the Pentecostal church nearby. Their celebrations are livelier, they clap and sing, plus they send my children to school. Today, I still keep asking, when they are asked to articulate their needs, their longings, their joys, they are clear. But when they are asked what the Mass does to them, they are not. So I was thinking, is this my concern or theirs? But since we are in conference of the Eucharist, maybe I continue asking, what does the Church today envision the Eucharist to be? Is there something there that I can share with my people? Browsing through some recent Vatican documents, we can sense three main interrelated directions on contemporary Eucharistic theology: a renewed emphasis on the sacrificial dimension, a heightened concern for the ars celebrandi, and the promotion of Eucharistic amazement. One advantage to speak in the last part of the conference is the unexpected grace of having someone before you elaborate in clearer terms what you wanted to say. So today, I thank Tom Dalits for making it easy for me. My little contribution in this conference is to continue his line of argumentation in two ways. One, that the priority of the vertical is in fact present not only in Ratzinger, but also in other church pronouncements in recent years. And two, it is strategically executed by his retrieval of the notion of sacrifice, enhanced liturgical celebrations, and promoting Eucharistic awe and amazement. Let me go through this one by one. First, there are some sectors in the church today who think that the meal dimension of the Eucharist, quite popular during the post-Vatican II reforms, leads to horizontalism and liturgical sentimentality. These groups find its allies in John Paul II's Ecclesia de Eucharistia. In order to counter horizontalism, the document intentionally brings back the sacrificial dimension of the Eucharist. The Eucharist is a sacrifice in the strict sense. In fact, it is first and foremost offered as a gift to the Father. What is emphasized by the Pope is Christ's vertical giving, as Tom said yesterday. The horizontal giving becomes corollary. Second, the vertical dimension of the sacrifice consequently leads to the distinctly liturgical emphasis of Eucharistic theology, and the important place accorded to ars celebrandi. Ars celebrandi, in fact, has been the well-known project of the recent popes as seen in these documents. Liturgia Authenticam 2001 ensures that the translation of liturgical texts into vernacular is faithful to the Latin original. Redemptione Sacramentum makes sure that the abuses on liturgical celebrations are addressed to its tiniest detail. Examples abound, like that the linens used in the Mass should be washed twice, first by the hand and second in any other way. I don't know what that means actually. Or that the alb should be tied with a cincture to the waist and the amice on the neck, not the other way around. It was in Mani Nobiscum Domini 2004 where the Eucharistic adoration outside the Mass was highlighted, and Summorum Pontificum 2007 enthrones the 1962 Missal to become the extraordinary way to celebrate the Eucharist. To crown it all, Sacramentum Caritatis of 2007 devotes a whole long section entitled Ars Celebrandi, taking the issues from reviving the use of Latin, which Ratzinger somewhere calls the language of the angels, and the promotion of the Gregorian chant as the chant proper to the Roman liturgy. Third, John Paul II talked about rekindling Eucharistic amazement as his direct intention in Ecclesia Eucharistia. That's his word. That is to be able to contemplate the face of Christ in his many presences, but mainly in the real presence in his body and blood. This comes to be concretized later by Benedict XVI in Sacramentum Caritatis, in the proposals for Eucharistic adoration, the devotion outside the Mass in different forms like 40 hours devotion, processions of the Blessed Sacrament, Eucharistic congresses, and returning back the tabernacle to the center of the sanctuary. Third point. What do I see as the problem with these recent theological directions of the magisterium? First is the retrieval of sacrifice. As we all know, sacrifice is not a very attractive word in contemporary theology. Whether used to explain the death of Jesus or the Mass in its blood as its bloodless substitute, the word has been associated with expiatory suffering, penal substitution, or vicarious satisfaction, reminiscent of the medieval debates all the way up to Anselm's question, cur Deus homo? Consequently, to drum up the violent language of sacrifice and victimhood on a people like those in Beatas, who are already trampled upon, continually beaten and abused by the present dominant political economic powers, do not at all speak of the good news of liberation that the Paschal mystery is supposed to bring. It is not only insensitive, but also inhuman to speak of sacrifice to the victims led to the slaughter each day in the altar of global capital machine. However, the magisterium's retrieval of sacrifice cannot be faulted for this seemingly crude and medieval theological direction. Ratzinger is himself not afraid to use the word. But according to him, it really depends on what they mean by sacrifice. So, what does sacrifice mean for Ratzinger? First, sacrifice does not only consist in the destruction or immolation of something as traditional sacrifices require, but in the transformation of man in love. He is not very famous for inclusive language. That's his word. And he refuses it. Sacrifice must be, first of all, to unite with God. Second, Jesus is the full expression of the new sacrifice. He was crucified exactly when the Paschal lambs were immolated in the temple, which means that in Jesus' death, the temple sacrifice has been destroyed. His resurrected body becomes the new sacrifice. And third, through his death, we ourselves become new spiritual sacrifice. By retrieving sacrifice, therefore, Ratzinger strategically executes the vertical dimension of Eucharistic theology. For Benedict XVI, this accent on the human and divine relations rightly serves as a strong antidote to moralism. This is his word, moralism, ethics, and moral theology, that in his assessment plagues contemporary theology. Moralism is a term given to the modern Kantian rationalist tendencies to reduce Christianity to the dimensions of ethical framework, or to equate faith with obeying the law, which Ratzinger and thinkers like him label as neo-Pelagian. To counter it requires a proper theology of grace, where salvation does not consist in doing good works through obedience to law, but a personal encounter with Jesus Christ and ultimately with the Trinity. So far, so good. But this valid and noble dimension, the vertical direction when applied to the Eucharist, also displays its own shadow. And the shadow is this: the primacy it gives to ars celebrandi and the promotion and rekindling of what is called Eucharistic amazement. Sacramentum Caritatis clearly relates liturgy with beauty, which is also close to the heart of Benedict XVI, which he adopted, I think, from Bon Balthasar. Here, one sees the Ratzinger, who is not only a philosopher and a theologian, but also an artist and a liturgist. His writing on liturgical music, architecture, postures, gestures, and vestments all points to the same preoccupation. All these are aimed to foster interior disposition of Eucharist and reverence for what he says as the sublime expression of God's glory and a glimpse of heaven on earth, to use his words. Beyond documents, however, we can now see how preferred papal liturgical practices like embroidered old-style chasubles, looking like guitars, display of 7 or, 6 big candles on the altar, and there you see the cross, receiving communion in the tongue and kneeling. If you notice, they have to kneel when they commune with the Pope. Celebration at Orientem, etc. The sad thing is, these are all copied almost to their details in far-flung dioceses and churches. So much so that in a very warm country like the Philippines, you can see minor seminarians and small acolytes donning black cassocks in Roman colors with white surplices, also mimicking papal liturgies. To think that from the Spanish times we have been exempted to wear black cassocks for the tropical countries. Example. Since Sacramentum Caritatis is based on the Synod of Bishops of the Eucharist, a cursory survey of the interventions done during the Synod is summarized in El Observatore Romano, and it's quite revealing. It shows that around 75 bishops, when speaking about the Eucharist, preferred to talk on matters of liturgical propriety, importance of Eucharistic adoration, genuflection, nocturnal adoration, respect for moment of consecration, the loss of the sense of the sacred, etc. On the other hand, only around 15 bishops talk about the Eucharist and suffering, justice, and solidarity. This statistical proportion is reflected in the document that follows, Sacrosanctum Sacramentum Caritatis, where Ars Celebrandi, that's chapter 3, occupies and takes 35 articles, while Ars Vivendi, the mystery to believe, only takes 6 articles. Some synod speeches sounds funny and ridiculous. One bishop said that the Holy Sees should establish a universal regulation making the official way of receiving communion to be that of the mouth and kneeling. Communion by the hand would be reserved only to the clergy. Another said, I propose using for the Holy Mass also a name, the Holy and Divine Liturgy, next to the Latin one, already in use but not very precise. It would be a title that suggests a better way to the sacred and invites to meditation, to amazement, silence, adoration. Not that these pious suggestions are evil in themselves, but the demanding and stinking noisy chapel of Payatas, when all you could hear are sounds of crying babies around and the roarings of trucks of dumps. I don't know how to make sense of these suggestions. In all this, I was reflecting last night and going back to our sessions, Ratzinger's appropriation of the Lubak is quite peculiar. And he is very proud of it, but I think it's quite peculiar. While the Lubak wants to restore the concept of corpus verum into the church, Ratzinger seemingly pulls it again to the opposite direction by his distinct emphasis on the ars celebrandi and the sacrament of the altar. And also last night, as I was revising this talk, I just realized that the Eucharistic amazement and awe seems to be a common term for Ratzinger and in Diego's talk yesterday. They're not a little bit strange, no? But I also think there is a whole world of difference. While Ratzinger talks of reserved and interior awe for the Eucharistic species, consistent with his priority of the vertical, Diego talks about amazement and awe on how ordinary people participate and celebrate with gusto their daily rituals in everyday life. With the vertical dimension, what is in fact erased and forgotten and suppressed is the love of the neighbor. One curious example is quite telling. In the Ecclesia de Eucharistia, the Pope referred to Jesus' attitude to the woman who anointed him in Bethany, John 12:1-8. He commented that the Church feared no extravagance, devoting the best of her resources to expressing wonder and adoration before the unsurpassable gift of the Eucharist. Number 48. It is quite surprising to see this peculiar allusion, since exegetical studies do not actually hint at anything liturgical or Eucharistic about this narrative. When Jesus said that the poor you will always have with you, but you do not always have me, biblical scholars point to the contrast between the works of mercy, which is burial of the dead, and works of justice, which is alms giving to the poor. Both directions refer to the concern for the needy. Nowhere does it suggest any liturgical and Eucharistic meaning. Yet the Pope curiously lifted it out of context to justify Church's extravagance in worship. At best, it is careless exegesis and appropriation. At worst, it is an insult to the pain and suffering of scavengers who only eat pagpag once during the day and just drink water to fend off hunger during the night. On a personal note, it is also diametrically opposed to what Vincent de Paul, the founder of the saint of this university, advised to his missionaries, that in fact, we can sell chalices in order to help the poor. The last part. At the start of this paper, my concern is simple. How shall we think of the Eucharist today in a way that makes sense to the people of Payatas? Though I only talk of Payatas, this location also represents the 1.2 billion people all over the world today who live on less than $1 a day, referred to the United Nations Millennium Development Goal. Our first instinct as a church is to look to our main resources, the magisterium. But it seems we do not find it there. To be able to be of help to my friends in Payatas, to make sense of the Eucharist, which we celebrate every Sunday, maybe I need to look for it somewhere else. Maybe they are found in the rough grounds and not from above. These documents, noble as they are, seem to come from a very different social location, from concerns quite different from the grounds where I speak. In its concern to counter contemporary liturgical horizontalism that it sees as dominating the post-Vatican reform, it has directed its view on the vertical, which, like all binary thinking, ironically also turns itself to be imperialistic and hierarchical. What it wanted to avoid in the first place, which is communal liturgical sentimentalism, returns through the back door in its more individualistic and pietistic forms, like Eucharistic amazement. And with the power of the magisterium behind it, it can intimidate many, and many other ways of worshiping, celebrating and meaning-making of the Eucharist in different contexts. Susan, the other day, talked about what are the obstacles to Jacob's suggestions. I think the first obstacle is this direction. Because you could not imagine how these documents are forcibly implemented by bishops and liturgists worldwide, up to the smallest churches and chapels that you can find. And anyone who tinkers with the liturgy is suspect, and it can cost you your life. What were unconsciously suppressed and forgotten are in fact the meals Jesus had. Simple human meals among both familiar faces and outcasts, which are also close to the heart of my Payatas friends. For all you know, they also share their backpack among themselves, no matter how little. Jesus' meal fellowships. In Jesus' meal fellowship, there was wine and laughter, but also prayer and reverence. You don't have to divide. Sensitivity to others' needs, but also awareness of Abba. A sharing of joy and happiness, of betrayal and forgiveness. The whole of life is there. It's not sanitized at all. I was thinking, is this not the real Ars Celebrandi? During these meals, hearts and pains are listened to, doubts respected, wounds bound, and prejudices judged. They do not resemble at all the seemingly complacent and mediocre parish tea party liturgies. These are the words of Retrieval. Singing, "Cuddle me, Jesus," which he is rightly worried about. In these meals, in fact, are hard meals, difficult meals of sharing painful survival, of challenging narrow-mindedness and transgressing borders. To end, let me show this painting. This is done by a Filipino painter, now deceased, and my friend Joey Velasco. Some of his models here are children from Payatas. I do not know them personally now, but Joey says he knows where they live. One peculiar detail there is the child clutching her doll while looking at Jesus. Her name is Pinay. Her mother is working as domestic helper abroad. Her battered doll is a symbol of herself, who is more battered than she is, by her own father, who is also a drug addict. The painting is entitled Hapag ng Pag-asa, Table of Hope. I hope that the Eucharist be really a table of hope for real people, real faces, real hungers, and their afghans. Thank you.
Let me just start by saying thank you to both of you. What rich, engaging, thought-provoking presentations. I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions and much to discuss the rest of this day based on these two presentations. So we have about 20 minutes, and in the light of the limited time that we have, let me suggest that we proceed as follows. Perhaps we can ask 2 questions from the floor, and then we'll take questions in twos. That way we just get a range of questions and the speakers can decide how they want to handle those 2 questions. So I see a hand here. Angel, anyone else with a second question? Okay, and John Burke.
Thank you very much for your papers. Very inspiring too and challenging. I think this panel follows the first panel on martyrdom. Although in the first panel we were talking about those who died, but how about those who are also somehow killed or excluded, even from the own church? And I think that it has to do a lot with a very hierarchical church that has forgotten its roots, its Eucharistic roots of making a table fellowship with everyone and making a table of inclusiveness instead of a table of exclusion. And probably here we could talk about so many people that are constantly persecuted, priests and also laity, because they are not following all the canons of, in this case, the Eucharistic canons for celebrations of the Eucharist. And also the latest notifications that the Vatican is sending to several theologians, in the case of some Spaniard theologians that have been notified by the Vatican in a way that I find it quite unjust. Also, I was thinking about in the situation in Mexico, for instance, where there is so much crime and killing of the innocents. Very few bishops are really defending those people that are vulnerable, and they are very much in the status quo, following the status quo. And we have a lot of problems with crime and violence, and the bishops are not really speaking up for these people. Very few bishops, I would say, like Samuel Rees, who unfortunately died, and now Arul Raja, who is also speaking up, defending the poor, defending the women, defending the gay and lesbians, but they are also being persecuted. He is also being persecuted by the same Vatican. And so I think that in some ways we talk about the martyrdom of those who are killed, but how about the martyrdom of those who are excluded, those who are persecuted by the same church?
My question is directed more to Maria. I'm just curious, listening to your presentation, you clearly said the spiritual and theological argument for shifting from a culture of casteism to a culture of communion. Are there any concrete studies or case studies or examples of congregations or communities that have made the actual shift beyond moral exhortation? And how did they do it?
Many studies are undertaken. I want to profusely put up the bibliography over there. So it is not, I'm heavily basing myself on well published, well documented, and also the whole question of field trips. The subjective elements of people have been duly recorded. But unfortunately, these studies are not capturing the headlines, not hitting the headlines of United Nations organizations, nor do they become. Even the whole question of Pope John Paul II commenting on the casteism is the first time in the history of the Church. Holy Father making a comment directly on casteism. And also in some of the congregations like Jesuits, first time referring to Dalits in 1995. So far it is a voice from the wilderness. Now it's slowly getting further. All along, people are talking about Swami Vivekananda, Swami, or Mahatma Gandhi, or even the Vedic world, textualized world. These people are representing the voice which are yet to be textualized. And now I see a very positive approach to coming up. All these things are documented, not mere impressions.
In response to Angel's question, I remember something that I do when I teach. Exclusion, for instance. I have preserved a t-shirt of mine. It's yellow and it says something there. For a world without strangers. So I always wear that when I teach the topic. And it's quite old now because I have been teaching for 15 years. The shirt. But I was thinking, I think that should be the vision for the church. But in fact, it's quite difficult to happen. Not only in the international level, but also in the grassroots communities. So that exclusionary processes, not only in the mind, which we can of course critique, the exclusion of the horizontal for the vertical, etc., but in actual parish concrete life, that still continues to happen. When in a fiesta, the priest and the sisters and the bishop, each in a different place, when the ordinary people are given just a little plate or whatever under the trees. Actual moments of exclusion. And I was thinking, anyway, there is this plague which continues the exclusionary process, and that's clericalism. And our seminaries, in fact, continue to manufacture the clerical mind, which is fostered by the promotion of the ars celebrandi. That's in the level of symbols and in the level of bodies. And the more they are corporalized, like the caste system, the harder for it to be erased. And I think that's...
Before we take our next set of questions, I've also been reminded, if you have an evaluation form as part of your packet, you're invited to fill those out and return them at the end of this session. So we have a question here.
Unfortunately, again. Two reflections. First, it seems like what recent papal writings have done is to have an emphasis that really results in a new Docetism of our age, and that the antidote to that is a reflection on incarnation. And so you could comment on that. And secondly, I find this very difficult. There was a theme that was common in both presentations. Maria talked about kenosis being inappropriate for the Dalits who are already self-empty. And Daniel talked about sacrifice. That's also a kind of a theme that runs in womanist theology in this country. You know, that they're already victims, therefore we can't ask for kenosis. And yet it seems to me that in the Christian, I have great difficulty with this because it seems in the Christian dispensation, there's two choices. We either serve one another or we dominate one another. And I don't know what the middle ground is. And it seems to me that there is an appropriate sacrifice and an appropriate kenosis, although I admit there's an inappropriate one, in that those families, for example, who are foraging in the trash heaps, it's not just that they are sacrificed because of their social situation, but they are serving their families in absolutely appropriate ways, you know, in terms of caring for one another. So I guess my plea is always, these are categories that need purification, but I think they're categories that need to somehow stay central to the Christian message.
We'll take one more question from Maria Kadal.
I would like to thank both of you for those moving and challenging presentations. Seeing what Danny showed about the backpack and the people, I remember my country where many people live on the garbage. There was a Brazilian artist who made a recent, very beautiful movie, won prizes, I think it was one of the Oscars. Vic Muniz, extraordinary garbage, showing the life stories of people who live on the garbage. Very impressive. But I have one question to Maria about, I don't know if I understood well what you said about Gandhi and his attitude towards the Dalits. That shocked me a lot because, well, it's a man that we always admire fully. I would like to hear you a little bit on that. And to Danny, all you showed about the actual Pope attitude and teaching on liturgy. And the question I bring here is, what about the liturgical reformation of Vatican II? Wasn't it a real reformation for all the church? Can we go backwards on that? Or ignore it totally? Because that's the impression that I have. About his interpretation of John 12:1-8, it's a text I like very much. I would agree that, well, to praise the Lord, nothing is enough, beauty, etc. But not luxury. Luxury, as Pedro Cavalcarica would say, is a word that's split from Christian mouth forever. So, well, if you can comment a little bit about that.
With regard to kenosis, the situation invites for a very sharp analysis on the kenosis, not a regular type of idioms that we quite often use. For example, the chief priest Caiaphas was talking about it's better that one man dies for many. In principle, it's excellent. But who is that? It was prescribed kenosis. God imposed kenosis, people reject. We are not here as a ready-made victim down the centuries as a stereotype. No. This type of kenosis is an abomination, anti-God, anti-life. But kenosis has to be evolved, embraced as a scientific suffering. If at all I like just to throw away the imposed suffering, I have to pay the price. And it has to be always embraced from deep within. From that point of view, kenosis has still a relevance from the Christian point of view. Dying so that life may flourish. That element is there. So we need to, instead of going about kenosis, kenosis has value only insofar as it is voluntarily embraced with the clear perception, by way of risk taking, and with a dimension of faith, and for the sake of many. So we can differentiate between kenosis prescribed by Caiaphas and kenosis embraced by Jesus in Mark 10:45. That's an answer for me. Fine. With regard to Gandhi, I think truth hurts us. We can't help it. Gandhi is a great man, no doubt, but a great man as far as the Dalits are concerned. A man who was not ready to change the hierarchy radically. So for which we need to go interpret Gandhi through the eyes of Ambedkar, who was the architect of Indian jurisprudence. And somehow Gandhi was representing the caste society through exhortation freely given over to the caste-minded people. I know there goes one proverb in Tamil now, hey, pick up, throw me your feather, throw me a feather, throw me a feather. Pick up would never throw. And Gandhi was busy with beseeching, oh, why can't you get converted? Why can't you practice ethics of egalitarianism for those who are professionally practicing? So for him, untouchability is a crime against humanity, no doubt, for which he was not ready for radical change of the structure. For him, casteism is God-made, should not be disrupted. And the Dalits are taking very serious exception to that. You know, always with regard to the gap between cognitive claims of religion and performative aspects of religion is always the same. And along those lines, the principles of egalitarianism as proclaimed the gospel, and also the performative dimension through liturgy or through day-to-day life, through practice, there's always a gap. And sometimes it's a regrettable gap. Sometimes it is a Pharisaic gap. We have to tackle that. There's no other go. Only through the eyes of the people whom we seek to serve. That alone can sharpen our theological vision.
In response to Susan's question on kenosis, I don't think the assessment of the retrieval of sacrifice in contemporary theology, I don't think that kenosis should be expunged from the Christian theological language. I think it's always part of that. But I think as shepherds, we all are. I think we should know when to give proper food on the proper season. And in my view, if people have already been fed with too much sacrifice daily, you don't have to preach sacrifice anymore. In fact, they have already internalized that they are born for sacrifice. And to reinforce that in that context, would be unjust, I'm afraid. Maybe in another season, in front of kings, in temples, maybe there we need to retrieve. But I don't think that it's all for one and one for all. Second, to the question of liturgical reform, I have read something, I read for that. There are three kinds of people vis-à-vis the liturgical reform of Vatican II. One, the people who would like to go back and defend the others. There are many of their cohorts inside the church itself. Those who would like to forward it, but there are those who are in between. And these people are members of what they call the reform of the reform. I would like to situate Benedict in the center, in that sense. Well, as he forwards the Vatican II agenda of liturgical reform, in fact, he does not know where to place himself at the moment. When I was reading him, he talks about Latin chants and Gregorian chants and worshiping facing the east and all this retrieval of old liturgical vestments. At the same time, the thing is, he says that worship should be facing God and celebrates Mass facing the people. So I don't really know. If he wants to be consistent, he should know where he should put this place where his mouth is, etc. So I think there's a long spectrum of positions.
I'd say 3 hands, and we're just bucking up on the time here. So we can just get the 3 questions in, we'll hear them, and then some quick responses. Michael, Anthony, and then a hand in the back here.
Thank you both. Thank you very much to both of you. My question, I think, directs more to Danny's remarks. I was wondering if you might reflect on some possible connections or correlations between the type of abstraction and aestheticization of Eucharist that you describe and the more or less complete abandonment of any sort of structural critique of capitalism in papal documents and Vatican documents over the last 30 years. I think the extent to which questions of chaplaincy as more mode of thinking about naming capitalism as a problem has become so dominant. I think Centesimus Annus will go down as an embarrassment historically in some ways, but I can't help wonder that there's a connection between that sensibility and the type of individualization, the type of return to a whole different understanding of the Eucharist that you described for us. Just interested in your thoughts.
Just to make a comment on Arul's comment on Gandhiji, I slightly disagree with this comment. There is a measure of truth. It says, if you look at Gandhiji's political practice, I would say that he was very much favoring Dalits. He was totally against untouchables, etc. Often in our country, we look at Gandhi for the solution of everything. We are blaming him for the sense of omission rather than commission. Plus, his political contingency was the independence of India. So he wants to rally the people for this particular cause. So there is a measure of truth what you said. I don't absolutize your statement that he was anti-Dalit. We can disagree. Just want to make a comment.
One last question.
Sorry, it's not a question. I'd just like to add a little reflection of Father Arul Raja. I am a priest working in the US as a chaplain for the Department of the Veterans. I am one of the rare untouchable priests who escaped from India. I am a priest, 25 years I am a priest. Even unto this day, I cannot talk with my bishop 2 minutes face to face, sit along with him. Because my Catholic bishop is an upper caste man, he could not digest the fact that I am in the United States working for the US government. Not only the bishops, even the fellow priests, my diocese, archdiocese, 2/3 of the priests are upper caste priests. Even though the archdiocese, we are 70%, 75% are untouchables in my own diocese. So having been priest 25 years, even today, I struggle hard with my own identity. The US government is able to recognize my potentiality. The white people generally, they are able to have sympathy with our caste. But in India, what happens, when you hold on to power, control, authority for so many years, all of a sudden, these Dalits are asking for equality. All we are asking is, we have been downtrodden for centuries. We never opened our mouth. We were like silent lambs because we never had education. We never had money. So all our life, we were like slaves. But in the last 50 years, there is some hope. So when all we are asking is a piece of cake, what these people have been enjoying for centuries. Even Vatican is not sympathetic to us. You saw that after 150 bishops, only 6 are Dalits. That raises red flag for us in America. You know how 20 million untouchables are there in India. And yet, only we are 6 Dalits who are promoted to the bishop level. So what does it show? In the United States, how Vatican is addressing the sexual abuse cases. I have been in this country for some time. That's why I can talk like this. In India, I can't even open my mouth. How Vatican is responding to the sex abuse case here. Because the way I look at America, because we have money here. If we don't send money, the Vatican will be in trouble. So Vatican is very serious of these sexual abuse cases and addressing it very seriously. But in India, the Dalit issue has been for centuries. In the last 50 years, Vatican knows about that. And Vatican doesn't want to deal with this because we cannot give any money to Vatican or do something else, So this is I'm very happy that Nepal has given this wonderful opportunity for the Dalit issues to be taught nationally and internationally. In the last 15 years I've been in this country, I've been promoting the rights of the Dalits in my own way. So whatever Father Raj, he spoke, it's a kind of platform for our own communities. We are almost 200 million touchables in India right now. And our voice is never heard. And thankfully there has been some progress. We are meeting like this. So I really thank you for this opportunity to share my own reflection, how we can empower Dalits in the coming days.
One quote from Mahatma Gandhi, with regard to the change of religion. All these Dalits are just like cows. Don't think of them as if they can decide for themselves. Look at it like this. One can decide for themselves whether I am more interested in expecting Dalits to accept Mahatma Gandhi or Kaliat or anyone else. You are such an important figure, has to be accepted. Let the Dalits decide whether they approve of Gandhi or not. Let them decide. Let not you and me decide.
In response to Michael's question about the bifurcation of aestheticization, the liturgy, and address to structures of the economy, I think, I don't know, I only read Vatican sources when I am challenged to do so, as to prepare for this conference. One bishop even told me, so what do you think about money to Viscum Domini? And when it went out, I said, what is that? I think like it came out a month after and I didn't know about it. And I said, are you a theologian? And he said, I said, yeah, I don't know, maybe. And he said, but why are you not reading church documents? But anyway, in my analysis of the little readings that I might have, I think the bifurcation of liturgical aestheticization and addressing economic global structures is in fact a product of what I call binary thinking. In many of these documents, dualism. And the problem with dualism, binary thinking, is that it tends to be hierarchical, and it imposes its hierarchy by being imperialistic. In this context, the liturgical aestheticization is the first class, and addressing issues of economy becomes second class. Even as the documents are in fact nuanced. In fact, you can also find addressing economy, caritas libertate, etc. They are all addressed. But in the final analysis, the binary thinking actually goes, to assert itself. An example, I have my text there. In the text that I made, I took the footnotes out so that I can maintain the time element. But in the text, I was analyzing Sacramentum Caritatis. That's the last post-synodic document. It says there that the Eucharist should also address, etc., globalization. There is a statement there. But after those sharp analysis of globalization, what it points out to as lines of action is, it points out to the offerings during the Eucharist, altar offering collection, and caritas, etc. My question is this how we address the problem of globalization with caritas and altar collection? Then you see the binary thinking working in these documents. I don't know, just often reflection.
Thank you. We're out of time now. 2 items. The first is that the next session is here in this room beginning at 1:30, and the topic for discussion is Theology of Food, Eucharist, and Body Politics with Angel Mendez Montoya and Naomi de Anda. So this will be a nice follow-up to this conversation, I'm sure. And I just encourage all of us to continue these conversations today and over the course of the next few days. Thank you very much to our presenters.